Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on greenwashing, carbon capitalism and the role of public relations. It's really lovely to have you all join us. As I've said, apologies for the slight delay in the start. We weren't aware that the link wasn't working, so we had to remedy that before people could join. But we're really delighted to have you with us. It's an event that we've been hoping to host for some time now, and various things have kind of conspired against us. So it's really great to be joined by both the panelists and by such a good audience today. One of the reasons for the event, or for holding the event, was because of this incredibly urgent and pressing challenge of climate and the intersection that that has with the media industries. And as you'll have seen in the introduction to the event, a lot of work has been done already on the ways in which media represents climate change. And that demonstrates very eloquently how coverage itself privileges certain understandings of climate change and certain types of solution, but perhaps stop short of calling for fundamental change. And it also tends to sidestep the reality that the media are implicit in climate change as well, in the causes of climate change as well, or implicated in those causes. So in this panel discussion, we're adding to the work that's already been done by exploring how the public relations profession in particular, as part of the media and communications and promotional industries, has facilitated climate narratives that confuse and obfuscate while perpetuating a type of solutionism that actually protects corporate ambition, protects some of the largest media companies in the world, and sacrifices the collective good. And I'm really pleased to say that we have a group of fantastic panelists joining us today. Benedetta Bravini from the University of Sydney, Jotam Kaleno, an environmental activist based in New Guinea, Paulina Magana Calvajal, who's from a nutritional health campaign coordinator at El Poder del Consumidor in Mexico, Clea Bourne, a senior lecturer at Goldsmiths University, and Melissa Aronchik from Rutgers. Each panelist is going to speak for about 7 minutes. I'll introduce them briefly before they start. And then at the end, we'll wrap up with Melissa providing a reflection on what the other four panelists have said, pulling that back to her own work and research project that she's carried out over the last couple of years that I'm sure many of you have seen covered. And then we'll open the floor to questions. So for the Q&A, please do put your questions in the chat. Not in the chat, in the Q&A box, not the chat, apologies. And I will pick them up as the panel progresses and at the end, and I'll try to get to as many of them as possible. We do have a good hour and a half, hour and 15 minutes now to pick up questions, and the total amount of panel discussion should be around 40 minutes, so we should have a good amount of time for the questions as well. So with that, my name is Lee Edwards. I'm a professor of strategic communications here at the LSE, and I'm going to chair the session. And I will hand over first of all to Benedetta Bravini from the University of Sydney. Benedetta. You're muted.
Before I start, I want to acknowledge, and thank you so much for having me. Before I start, I want to acknowledge that I'm connecting from the University of Sydney, which was built on the land of the Gadigal people of the Ora Nation, and I want to pay my respect to the traditional owners of this land. On the 20th of March this year, the United Nations Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, made up of the world's leading climate scientists, released its last report, calling for an end to new fossil fuels exploration and for rich countries to quit coal, oil, and gas. And the report concluded that to stay under the warming limit set in the famous Paris Agreement, and the world needs to cut 60% of its greenhouse gas emission by 2035. I think we are all familiar with these warnings. And recent severe weather conditions provide a stark reminder that the disruption caused by the interruption of these natural cycles is not confined to remote regions of the world. While this unfolds, society is also relying on technology and data-driven communication system more and more. So technological innovations and digital services and the so-called green technologies have become the only clear response we offer to global warming in all policy debates. Instead of considering a radical change to our current economic model, which is focused on growth at all costs, we are embracing the kind of technological determinism and solutionism that was promoted since the 90s by Silicon Valley, that has always promised to be post-ideological, to use Chantal Mouffe's word. Every political problem, we are told, has a technological solution. And colleagues in this panel for sure have a lot to say on the role of PR on the creation of these mythologies. But in this intervention, I want to ponder on these technology mythologies and their impact on our ability to take action on the climate emergency. I'm interested specifically in the type of tech solutionist discourse that since the 90s branded new data-driven communication system as immaterial. And I'm sure that you all remember the idea of information superhighways in reference to the global potential of the internet. In such accounts promoted by Silicon Valley, the metaphors used were explicitly juxtaposed with the physicality and resource-consuming character of the precedent industrial era. And so discursively, it's significant that we're already moving to this idea that through technology capitalism was becoming less resource intensive. So this new technology capitalism was less intensive, and of course, it was also less environmental costly. Think of the metaphor of cloud computing that was brilliantly analyzed by Vincent Mosco, that helps to sell the concept of a fluffy, floating, omnipresent storage capacity, immaterial, powerful, benign, except that we know the data centers' energy usage averages 200 terawatt hours each year, which is much more than the average of the national energy consumption of many countries around the world, and I'm always using the example of Iran. Greenhouse gas emissions from the information and communication industry as a whole is increasing to become over 14% of the total of greenhouse emission around the world. And then finally, think of the metaphors used to describe AI, such as vision, learning, recognition, that suggest that machines fulfill the same function as humans, again, moving away from any reference to the infrastructures and resources they exploit. Technology is now on the cusp of taking us into a magical age, warned Eric Schmidt, the former executive chairman of Alphabet, Google's parent company, in 2017. Except that this age is not magical at all. This portrayal of data-driven communication technology as immaterial, as magic, has two effects on us. First, it obfuscates the materiality of the infrastructures on which technology is based that are central to the environmental question. And secondly, it renders impossible to imagine alternative ways of thinking about the climate emergency. Green capitalism, based on technology fixes, seems the only possible way. Instead, I'm arguing that we need to understand technology and be able really to analyze the kind of global production and supply chain and life cycle of these technologies, which is deeply rooted in techno-colonialism. This means we have to begin with the extraction of rare metals and mineral sources that are needed for these infrastructures and these machines to run. Indigenous people have been on the front of this, on key sites of protest against corporate capture of natural resources for centuries. Their moral philosophies of custodianship and community relationship offer essential cultural resources for alternative models of sustainability that are too often ignored. But we need also to consider the cost of the production and training of these technologies. And if you want, we can go back to this slide later on. When communication and computational machines are discarded to conclude the life cycles of these technologies, of course, they become electronic waste, e-waste, burdening local municipalities with the challenge of safe disposal. And of course, these tasks are constantly offshored, with developing economies having become digital dumping grounds for waste for more privileged nations, as the case of Kenya demonstrates. But the case of Papua New Guinea, for example, is another interesting case that we might explore in this panel. But I think there is still an opportunity to think about technology differently. The mythologies that I've discussed briefly have only been accelerated by the development of data capitalism, but it's clearly not working. We need to acknowledge that we cannot address the climate crisis with tech solutionism, as technologies have substantial environmental cost too. We need to address the climate emergency by stopping the extraction of fossil fuels. Once these mythologies are dismissed, we are liberated by their spell, and we can turn to the ideas coming from different alternative cosmologies. One of the most interesting, for example, is the idea of custodianship, which I associate with Aboriginal, Maori, or indigenous communities of the Pacific, of the Americas. And we have a very special panelist here, Jotham Israel Keleino, in this panel, that is going to talk after me and who has been involved with this type of campaign for at least a decade. And of course, in this type of resistance to the same type of colonialist extractionism that I just described. So I leave you to Jotham, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Benny, and I'll hand over to Jotham. You're muted at the moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Associate Professor Benedetta, and our host, and all the participants. And before I start, I would like to acknowledge my indigenous people of Huon Gulf in the Morobe province of Papua New Guinea, and my elders. Respects to them and to the gift of life. And as Professor Benedetta has already conveyed, I would like to give an experience from the people's point of view as far as how the development agendas in especially third world countries is concerned. And just for the backdrop, Papua New Guinea is an independent nation in the Pacific region. It is located south of the equator, and we share a land boundary with Indonesia, and also we have Australia to the south. It is the second largest island in the world, and it is situated in the tropics. It's fringed with spectacular coral reefs, thousands of atolls and small islands, with active volcanoes, tropical rainforest, fast-flowing rivers, huge lakes, savanna plains, and rugged interior terrains with mountain peaks that occasionally experience snowfall, so you can imagine the diversity. The weather is mostly wet and dry. It's tropical, and the temperature ranges from 20 degrees when it's a little bit colder to even 40 degrees Celsius when it is hot. And there's rainfalls throughout the year. And so basically this country is a biodiversity hotspot, both in marine and terrestrial terms. It's informally known as the last frontier. The population is about 8 million plus. We have over 800 plus languages. I think that's the highest number of languages a country has in the Guinness Book of Records. But we use three main official languages, being English, Pidgin, and Motu. English is used in business and education. Its religion is Christian predominantly. The government and the politics in this country is a parliamentary democratic system. The capital is in Port Moresby. It is a constitutional monarchy. And we have 22 provinces. The colonial history is basically, this country came about from a colony of German New Guinea to the north, and British Australia, Papuan territories to the south of the island. We became independent in 1975, 16th of September. We'll be turning about 47, 48 years, September this year. It's about half a century. The economy is mixed. and it's primarily, we have a primary industry, agriculture, mostly, and extractive industry, of which is the focus of my discussion to share with the panel and with all the participants. And so being extractive sector or the mining sector, mostly mining and petroleum and the mineral sector in this country contributes heavily to the GDP of Papua New Guinea. Where I come from is Morobe province in the north of Papua New Guinea. And I am from the coast side, which is Huon Gulf. And I would like to share our experience centered around that Gulf. Huon Gulf is one of two gulfs in Papua New Guinea. The other being Papuan Gulf in the south, where you have the Papua liquefied natural gas projects happening there. In our part, there's a very big mining project called the Wafi Golpu mining project, and that is happening in my province, and that is the center of our concerns. Now, Wafi Golpu mining project is a multi-generational mining project valued at around $99 billion US, $5 billion of which is only the construction phase, and they are into an advanced exploration, and the government is already embarking on the permitting process. The reason why the indigenous communities are very concerned. It is located in the Morobe province of Papua New Guinea, that's in the north. And our concern is about the method of waste disposal that the proponents or the developers are proposing. From the gold and copper extraction and other processes that will be taking place, as we know, one of the biggest concerns in the mining industry is how to manage or dispose the waste in a safe manner as to not destroy the environment and, importantly, people's lives. Unfortunately for us in Papua New Guinea, Wafi Golpu mining project, which is going to be, which is a joint venture between two companies or multinational corporations, being Newcrest Mining Limited, Australia-based, and Harmony Gold Mining Limited, also Australia-based, but from South Africa. The two joint ventures are proposing to dump the waste into our pristine Huon Gulf, where I am an indigenous and I come from. And so as I speak, I represent almost 400,000 people who live and thrive along this coastline for thousands of years. And when they propose to dump the mining wastes into our shorelines, it is something new that has never happened in our life, and it is causing a lot of anxiety amongst our people. The main reason why we are concerned is because the pipeline system from the Wafi Golpu mining project passes through the second largest city in Papua New Guinea, being Ley City, that has a lot of government, company, and school establishment already, that already has building establishment, but yet we have the mine plan proposing to be constructed right into the Ley City, and the deep sea tailing placement outfall will be right outside of one of our local villages called Wagan. And I have been working a lot in the last 10 years with the people of Huon Gulf coastline, Wagan being one of them, to the east and to the south coast of Huon Gulf. The description of the location can be found on the website nowafigolpudsdp.org. And therefore we are privileged to have a partnership in a campaign called No Deep Sea Tailing Dumping in Morobe Province, or Morobe Says No to DSTP campaign, that I have been in the center of this campaign for the last 10 years, since I graduated from the university. And I've been working closely with the communities, especially the indigenous communities, for the past 10 years as an advocate. The issue is that from the 290-kilometer stretch body of water that transcends almost 5 government districts out of the 10 districts in Morobe province, that's 5 government districts in Papua New Guinea, forms the Huon Gulf, is made up of over 300 to 400,000 people's lives that is about to be affected by the dumping of waste into the ocean. The dumping of waste, according to the mine plan, is about 30 to 60 million tons of mining waste or tailings every year. Now, if the government is permitting the license for over 50 years, you can do the math. That's 60 million tons times 50 years. That's the amount of waste that is going to be dumped into what we call home, the Huon Gulf, or what we regard culturally as the mother that has been feeding us for thousands of years. So, deep sea tailing placement is a method by which mining companies dump their waste into the ocean or into the sea. Now, in this case for us in Papua New Guinea, in terms of Wafigolpo mining project, the pipeline that is going to be discharging the waste out into the ocean is at about 200 meters from the shoreline, according to the mine plan. 200 meters from the shoreline is still close to our homes and houses. That's where our canoes go out for fishing. That's where our children go to swim. That's where we catch our fish for dinner. And so there is a lot of injustice in the way we are dealing with this issue. And that's the reason why I've been advocating very strongly on behalf of my indigenous communities. Now, deep sea tailing placement is not common around the world. Of over 3,000 gold and copper mines on the planet Earth, less than 15 utilize deep sea tailing dumping. The rest of them manage it on land. That tells you that deep sea tailing placement is rejected globally. The million-dollar question is, if the world rejects it, why do you do it in my homeland? Why? And from that 15 that is practiced globally, I think that is in Philippines, in Indonesia, in South America, and I think in Norway. Of the 15, half of that 15 is found in one country only. Yes, you guessed it right. It's in Papua New Guinea. Now that is the cause of concern for my people. Why PNG? We are human beings. We are not animals. And that is why we have been advocating strongly to the local, provincial, and national government, as well as the global community, that we have to do away with such unsustainable development practices. It is unsustainable. And oceans being the biggest absorber of carbon dioxide. If we start destroying oceans like this, we are actually assisting the increase of carbon dioxide, and we are contributing to climate change effects.
Yotam, I'm just conscious of time. You're making some really critical points. I wonder, would you be able to just bring things together in a final minute, and then we'll have to move on to Paulina. You know, it would be great to be able to come back to the campaign in more detailed discussion as well. Oh, we've lost your sound. I'll try to unmute. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll pause for now, and if there are any questions later, I can help to answer other questions. But in closing, the key issue is information gap. That is the lack of information between indigenous people, other governments, the developers, and other stakeholders. And information gap can be disinformation or misinformation. Example, the promise for employment and socioeconomic benefits that do not come. And so there are a lot of negative impacts, such as lack of consent, health risks, gender inequality, physical and economic displacement, destruction of sacred sites, and environmental degradation, to name a few. My role really in my community is to be an information or channel of communication between our indigenous communities and other stakeholders, being the government, the developer, and other stakeholders, so that we can bridge that information gap by way of translating technical concepts into lay people. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jotam. Really appreciate that, and it would be great to come back and talk to you a bit more about it in the Q&A. Paulina Magaña Carvajal is in a slightly different context over in Mexico. Paulina is the Nutritional Health Campaign Coordinator at El Poder del Consumidor, which she'll tell us a bit more about, but also an activist, also addressing industry interference. And it's great to have you with us, Paulina. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this panel. Apologize for my English. I'm going to try to do my best, but if something is not clear, maybe we can talk later in the Q&A and the discussion. So I'm going to present the denouncement that we made against Coca-Cola's campaign last year for using misleading advertising. So just to introduce, we are a Mexican civil society organization with more than 15 years of work. So our mission is to promote and defend human rights and consumer rights. And we focus, our campaign focus on health, on nutrition health and food environment, and some other topics like climate change and efficiency mobility. So to start with this topic, I would like to focus in this denouncement. So this campaign was presented in March 2022 by Coca-Cola Mexican Industry as a corporate social responsibility campaign called Love Multiplies. So this campaign focused on four lines. The first one is the well-being of the communities and how the communities and how they commitment to restore public spaces and low-income neighborhoods, but also they focus on supporting the empowerment of women, increasing their talent and their productivity. They also focus on how they support communities by providing clean water, even they are the main responsible of keep this water from the communities. And last but not least, it's a commitment to the environment. That is something that we are talking today, since this campaign included activities aimed to clean beaches and recycling. So these campaigns was presented on social media, radio, TV, some public spaces, and newspaper. So we decided to denounce this campaign in two government agencies. The first one was Profeco, that is the Consumer Protection Office in Mexico, and the second was COFEPRIS, the Mexican agency equivalent to the Food and Drug Administration. So our main argument of this legal action were first, the false advertising and greenwashing, because this campaign creates confusion about Coca-Cola action and the impacts, and also distract and minimize the harm of Coca-Cola products to health, but also for the environment. And it could be considered as indirect marketing, because that builds consumer loyalty and a good brand reputation, even with the impacts of this company. So we, together with other actors and organizations like Greenpeace Mexico, Nutrition and Water Rights experts, and other journalists, we present this evidence through this denouncement, focus on the evidence that fact that Coca-Cola is one of the biggest responsible for plastic pollution worldwide, according with the organization Break Free from Plastic, and also according to a study conducted by Greenpeace Mexico that found that Coca-Cola is the main company that contaminates the coastal beaches in Veracruz, Mexico. contributing 35% of the plastic waste found. So they want to clean their image through this message that they are responsible with the environment, but they are the main responsible about this plastic pollution. So we also recognize that this campaign is it's a tool to clean their image and also a marketing tool. So in addition, we made other action like press conference. We launched an anti-commercial marketing commercial called that we called Uncapping the Truth. That it's the video that we can see in the slide. Unfortunately, I just have it in Spanish, but I can share with you. In this video, we contrast the information that Coca-Cola gave in the campaign with some evidence with these other actors. So this is really this is a good video to show how they are acting. And we also made a forum with some experts, like national and international experts, talking about this topic. And we had a petition drive asking for removal of this campaign. So now we are waiting for the response of the government, and we are hoping to share this experience with other countries and the legal action that they made around this topic. So it's all for my side, and if something is not clear, maybe we can discuss in the next section. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulina. It's a really interesting contrast, and it strikes me that you've got an example there of a public relations campaign used in this very classic way to simply disguise what else is going on, while Jotan was talking about a campaign that just ignores what is actually going on. And they're really interesting perspectives and illustrations of how this kind of promotional world really works against climate in so many different ways. Let's hand over now to, thank you very much, Paulina. Let's hand over now to Clea Bourne, who's a senior lecturer, as I say, in the Department of Media and Communications and Cultural Studies at Goldsmiths University. And we already have her slides up, so I'll just hand straight over to you, Clea.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to circle back to where Benedetta was, because I also want to talk about the tech sector. And there is a lot of conversation about this sector now, because it has been growing very fast over the past decade or so, and it employs a lot of people around the world and has very far-reaching impact. So what we're finding today is that we're witnessing a new kind of greenwashing from the tech sector. And it's happening in order to offset very widespread concerns about harms coming from these sectors, harms associated with artificial intelligence or AI and automation, and some of the inevitable job losses that are concerning various countries, harms caused by the growth and control of digital platforms, the spread of biased algorithms and disinformation. And so tech giants really want to assure us of their good intentions. And at the same time, they're very keen to distract from the planetary impact of the tech sector's historic levels of exploitation and extraction that is happening now. And we're talking here not just about the growing energy use by the tech sector, but also extraction of minerals for manufacturing various digital components, and even things like their water footprint, which has tended to stay under the radar as an environmental issue associated with this sector, even though many tech companies are actually based in the state of California in the USA, which is a drought region. So the larger the tech industry grows, the more its carbon and energy footprint has increased, and the more the tech industry has actually cozied up to the extractive industries. So Amazon, for example, aggressively markets its AI to the oil and gas industry with programs that are designed to predict where the next oil field is in seconds. And while they do that, there have been a series of greenwashing announcements from the tech sector about their reductions in carbon emissions, for example, and a concept that they like to call green AI, which bandies about the idea that AI is a key part of the solution to the climate emergency. So this type of activity is increasingly being referred to as digital greenwashing. That is, campaigns that create the surface illusion of positive change in the tech sector without any kind of verifiable reality. But before I go on, I mean, we've talked about concerns of citizens, of consumers, etc. But I also want to bring in workers as well, because who are we talking about when we talk about the tech sector? I did start in a stereotypical fashion by suggesting that behind the tech sector might be these elite groups of powerful corporate actors who are up to no good. But the tech sector is not a monolithic whole. Interestingly, many of us as citizens actually became aware of the tech sector's role in the climate emergency because employees themselves stood up and said enough is enough. So in September 2019, workers from 12 tech companies joined the global climate strike, highlighting the tech sector's role in the climate crisis and demanding radical change. And I wanted to highlight this as I go on to talk about public relations in more detail, because I'm aware that there are many, many people working in public relations who care very deeply about climate issues. And of course, there are quite a number of people working in public relations who are helping to mount genuine campaigns for change. So what I'm going to do is add to some of the ideas that have been put forward by Benedetta, but also Jotam. Benedetta, you talked about mythology and about metaphor, and Jotam talked about information gaps. And those are just three ways in which campaign activity can contribute to what we recognize as greenwashing. So what I thought I would do is pick out three strategies that help us to understand why greenwashing is such a successful public relations strategy. And the first one that I want to look at is the use of visuals. Visuals are an increasingly vital part of any modern campaign, especially campaigns that are deployed via mobile or social media. And they're so effective because images transcend borders, they transcend language. So they play a very, very important role in shaping global discourses. According to Ganga Danesh, who is one of the people who writes about the use of visuals in public relations, images actually occupy a very privileged position. They're semiotically rich. And so they can trigger emotions that enable those images to disrupt rational arguments, logic-based paradigms. And so images also use emotion to enhance credibility of both the source and the message. And tech companies use this approach all the time. So visuals become a way of suggesting green credentials without saying very much and with very little hard evidence to back it up. I mean, it is hard to argue with symbolic visuals like these. And if you were to go to a search engine and enter terms like green and eco, a digital image bank could now bring up something like billions of images. The second tactic that I wanted to talk about is the use of something called plastic words. And words are really important, and especially in Western public relations, it tends to be the default way that people think of public relations as a skill. Kristin Demetrius has a really good book out that I would recommend called Public Relations and Neoliberalism. And in it, she traces the tremendous success public relations can achieve in spreading ideas and resisting interference through the use of plastic words. Now, this term plastic words actually comes from another author called Yue Porkson. But the idea of plastic words is that they are hollow and portable and pliable. And they can mean so much and absolutely nothing at all at the same time. And I noticed this with the Coca-Cola campaign that Paulina brought up on the screen, where plastic words were being used there too. So the words that I've listed here, including green and carbon footprint and eco, when PR propagates these plastic words, they connote a positive, futuristic set of notes about an organization's environmental activity, even though there may not be very much activity at all. And once in place, Demetrius says that these plastic words actually help to limit debate and to discourage interrogation of what an organization really is up to, because plastic words are there to lull and soothe us with their benign nature. They reduce ideas and deaden language, and that has side effects. So the final set of communication tactics that I wanted to talk about is enforced silences, because in an era when, despite the fact that we supposedly have improved corporate transparency, modern companies are astonishingly good at organizing silence and invisibility around their climate impact. And PR is deeply implicated in the sorts of corporate reporting processes that I'm about to talk about. For instance, when we attempt to account for the tech industry's climate footprint, it becomes immediately clear how little information is available. First of all, the vast majority of startup tech companies are actually privately owned, so there's no particular requirement on them to share this information anyway. But if we were just to concentrate on the huge tech companies that are publicly owned, listed on the stock exchange, we would still find that very little information is available. So we're left to rely on voluntary company disclosures, which do not make a thorough accounting of the tech sector's true climate impact. For instance, the graph on the right-hand side of this screen is from a report put out a couple of months ago by a company called Electronic Hubs. And it analyzes publicly available ESG and CSR reports from the largest tech firms. Now, according to all of this self-reporting information, it is actually Samsung that has the largest carbon footprint, and its carbon footprint exceeds that by far of other large tech firms. But Amazon as a company is actually much more significant than Samsung is in terms of its tentacles as a tech company. And that's because of the company that we mostly don't talk about as consumers or even as citizens, a company called Amazon Web Services, which is really where Amazon makes the lion's share of its profits. This company serves about half of the world's market for cloud services. Hence, millions of businesses and tech companies rely on AWS for their online operations. And this poses two problems in terms of trying to get to grips with what a tech company's actual impact is on carbon and energy. The first problem is that AWS remains a very non-transparent area of Amazon's operations. So they're non-transparent about their massive energy footprint. And the second problem is that this in turn makes it impossible for regulators and consumer activist groups and really any interested citizen to find out the impact of the millions of organizations that actually rely on AWS's infrastructure to assess and report their own energy and carbon footprint. So I've covered 3 different communication strategies that are used to execute digital greenwashing. And of course, these techniques are used by other companies and other sectors as well. So I'll stop there. And I'm sure that Melissa now has a very challenging task of bringing together some of the discussion, and maybe we can have a discussion about what comes next.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Clea. And as you say, we're going to hand over now to Melissa just to kind of bring everything together. No pressure.
Wonderful. Yes. So it's great to be part of this panel, and so inspiring to hear about these projects. Just to set the stage. So I'm a professor at Rutgers University in the United States, as Lee mentioned in the introduction, and I'm the co-author with Maria Espinoza of a book called A Strategic Nature, which is specifically about public relations and the politics of environmentalism. So a lot of the ideas I'm hearing here are trying to reflect them through some of the ideas in that book, but then also try to extend them and reflect on how important this work is. So I'll just go through in the order that we heard these presentations and try to draw out what I see as some of these really key ways that perhaps public relations intersects some of these campaigns and some of these problems. So in terms of Benedetta's, very useful discussion, very important discussion of green technology, technology mythologies, which, as she points out, are really not about transforming the system, but really about a kind of business as usual through using technology as the solution to all kinds of climate problems. So this is a really important tactic for us to be aware of, because we are very familiar with strategies of controversy, where we have arguments that say we need climate change, and then counter arguments that say, is climate change even real? This kind of denial, we're used to seeing this. But what the panelists are doing, and Benedetta's presentation makes us think about, is the extent to which, even though we are familiar with doubt and uncertainty, the extent to which we see consensus strategies or solution narratives by corporate interests, which are then amplified by public relations, are really important to think about, because a lot of environmental misinformation will promote strategies of consensus, compromise, and solutions instead of controversy. And that can actually work even more intensively to undermine environmental claims. So I think of, public relations actors are very trained in this art of compromise and consensus. This is the relations in public relations. They are really about creating connections with their audiences. And often the goal, as we saw in some of the other examples, is to influence people by aligning the message of, say, corporate actors to values and beliefs that are dominant in the society, to create legitimacy for the organization and trust in their message. And I think that's exactly what we see with the case that Benedetta brought us, where technology is brought forward not to say climate change doesn't exist. On the contrary, we say, yes, climate change does exist, and here's a solution that we ourselves have come up with, we companies, we in the tech sector. So green tech is, one of many types of solutions-oriented narratives that I think we need to be very mindful of. When we heard from Jotham with I actually greatly appreciated the overview of Papua New Guinea, because then this is maybe this part of the point I'm going to make, is that many people in the world are not aware, as they should be, of the situation in Papua New Guinea, of its size, of its importance in the world, but also of the mining and petroleum and mineral projects that are taking place, which are so devastating.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's so important. And so, of course, the first thing we think of is there are such vast and clear resource differentials between these multinational corporations and those of you who are living there, who are trying to apprehend this and deal with it. So because of this resource differential that are so high, there's always this kind of David and Goliath feeling, I think, to response. Now, the resource differentials are not just financial. Clearly they are financial and infrastructural, but they are also very heavily symbolic. The public relations itself is multinational, right? These are multinational corporations that make use of multinational channels, but the resistance is not, or it is only so with great difficulty. And this is what Jotham pointed out with this lack of information, this information gap that he is trying to step into and redress. So another way to look at this is that there is a real problem of visibility. And I know Clea on the panel has written quite extensively about this. So in a way, I want to defer to her as the expert on this topic. Pipelines are subterranean. Pipelines are designed to be submerged under the earth, but they are also designed to be submerged in our imaginations. And so what we have to recall is that public relations sometimes is about the work of silence and not the work of amplification or communication out. It's about silencing certain facts or practices or points of view. And this can also mean suppressing ideas or actors like activists who do not suit the dominant interests in industry or in government. And again, Jotham, I think, pointed this out very clearly. Part of this kind of suppression also, it doesn't just include silence per se, meaning we don't hear at all from these people, but also the spread of misinformation or disinformation. So there is also a kind of silencing through delegitimizing the voices of those who would speak up against projects like pipelines and mining projects. You know, we see this a lot in crisis communications, especially where, you know, people have to react very quickly when there's, for instance, an oil spill or an explosion of some kind. But, you know, Jotham's case teaches us, we see it also in long-term and slow processes where permitting takes place and it's not publicized. The important meetings happen and the advocates are not invited to this meeting, or they're not even allowed to find out about these meetings. You know, all of these ongoing processes are processes that include the silencing of others who would speak out on these contentious issues. And I would say that at the extreme end, this can take the form of intimidation or other kinds of really antagonistic behavior, of which, unfortunately, there is quite a bit to really prevent these people from speaking up. Moving to Paulina's case of denouncing the Coca-Cola CSR campaign in Mexico. You know, this is such an important campaign, and the project, I'm so happy to learn about this group and this collaborative project, because this really reminds us that so often CSR, corporate social responsibility, is kind of a synonym for PR, public relations. Sometimes we really cannot tell the difference between so-called social responsibility by corporations and really reputation management and public relations. So here I just want to address how Paulina showed us that misleading advertising and misleading marketing is a form of greenwashing. I think probably everyone on this call knows what greenwashing is, but, you know, just very briefly, just in case, the most basic way we could define greenwashing is attempts, normally by industry groups, but can be by others, to make their products or practices seem more environmentally friendly than they actually are. At root, we can think of it that way. And the role of public relations and advertising, as Paulina's case teaches us, is to craft promotional campaigns for their clients that explicitly engage in greenwashing as a way to protect the reputation of the company, especially in the communities where it operates. So, you know, there's a long list of ways that this can happen. The case Paulina showed us is one. It can also be similar to what we said a moment ago about silencing or minimizing information, omitting key information. It can be about downplaying the specific role that the company, in this case Coca-Cola, has actually played in contributing to climate change. I know that Coca-Cola is a massive user of water, for instance, and so trying to kind of reframe it as being about providing water or recycling water instead of being about their role in use of water. And, you know, and so on. There's longer and longer lists. Public-private partnerships are another, and so on. And so this greenwashing is really an insidious form of climate disinformation because it relies on these misleading or deceptive rhetorical tactics, similar to how Clea pointed out to us with visuals, with plastic words. And these can really obscure both the causes of climate change and the consequences for the public. So, you know, if nothing else, it serves as a giant distraction mechanism so that people really are just not sure what they should be focusing on and where the reality lies. Last, but certainly not least, to talk about Clea's work on techno-utopianism and digital greenwashing. So, you know, one thing that we often conveniently forget is that the technology itself is a major contributor to climate change. Another kind of sort of invisible infrastructure, data centers and so on, that we just never really think about when we're using our phones. You know, our phones themselves contain very harmful minerals and are often very quickly turned into e-waste through planned obsolescence, as Benedetta mentioned. I wanted to note that just this week, there was a couple of articles in the American news, at least, about Google and how 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, they said they would stop running advertisements alongside videos and other content that denies the existence of climate change, and yet they have not done so. So I would say we could sort of have a double problem with the tech industry. One is the material problem of e-waste and data centers and so on. And then the other is just the enabling by internet platforms of ongoing climate disinformation and misinformation. And this, of course, is an ongoing problem, a major problem. It's very hard to police, very hard to censor. And the internet structures, I think of things like search engine optimization, really enable climate disinformation. So we have very clear evidence of fossil fuel companies, for instance, purchasing keywords like sustainability and climate facts and global warming, so that when you search these terms, fossil fuel industry responses come up first. And we know that this, for many people who use the internet, we don't, they're not thinking critically and analytically every time they go online to search something. They're seeing these results. And once again, we have this situation where it's very hard to kind of move through all of this stuff and come to the truth. I want to stop there because I see it's already 9:10, and I know this would be much more interesting rather than hearing me go on to hear what all of you have to say, audience and panelists. So thanks for this chance to hear these presentations and to respond.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was a great finish to the panel, and thanks to all of you for creating such great contributions. That's given us plenty of food for thought, I think. And so I wanted to just kind of, one of the things that I think all of the presentations together illustrate is this incredible complexity of the interweaving between the tech industry, between the extractive industry, the information industries and promotional industries, and the ways in which they are deeply entwined in terms of serving their own interests, as well as deeply entwined in working for or against the interests of those of us who are trying to kind of navigate a climate challenged world, a climate crisis. We do have a couple of questions in the chat. We have about 20 minutes left. So I do want to go straight to the chat so we make sure we answer them. But then while they might be targeted at one particular panelist, other panelists, if you want to jump in, then please do so. The first two that we have are for Paulina. And the first is from Harry Priya, and he's asking, it's from an anonymous person asking about the response from Coca-Cola to the campaign. And then Steph Hill has asked, could you speak more about the negative pressure that Coca-Cola was responding to when it launched the campaign? So were there negative stories in the media, or were there particular incidents that they felt the need to respond to through the campaign? Paulina, I'll ask you to answer that first.
Yes, Coca-Cola is not very reactive with the media, so we don't have this kind of reaction. But as part of our activities, we were outside of the Coca-Cola's offices in Mexico City, demanding that they take responsibility of the plastic waste that they produce. And the only thing that they did was to cover the logo in front of the office to not be photographers. So yeah, it's the only thing that they did. But we have a serious problem with advertising campaigns in Coca-Cola in Mexico, not just for this environment issue, but also how they bring their advertising closest to communities, pretending to be like a corporate social responsibility and making use of emotional message. They do this emotional message. And yeah, there were some notes taken by media around the knowns. And as background of this campaign, we are trying to push a regulation related with misleading advertising. And even there were not some reaction. I think these companies in the loop of the civil society and other activists in Mexico. So I think that it's important.
Thanks, Paulina. I'm going to go to the next few questions, which all cluster around a particular topic. And I'm going to open it up to open those questions up to everyone, but perhaps we can start with Melissa to respond. But please do, other panelists, do come in on these. They really focus on the fact that we've talked a lot about the problems that the PR industry and the promotional industries create around narratives of climate and environmentalism. But then there are a few questions they're asking, okay, so what do we do then? If we raise awareness of these techniques, how can we assure that that awareness is used for good? What role does taking legal action play in taking action against these companies for creating? What else could PR, for creating misinformation, what else could PR do? So a bit more of a focus on, okay, well, what do we do now, I think is the general theme there. And perhaps if we go to Melissa first, and then perhaps to Jotam, given that you've been acting in response and doing things, that would also be great to hear more about. So Melissa, over to you first.
Yes, so there is a headline by the journalist Amy Westervelt from a month or two ago that I really keep in my mind, and it's "Accountability is a climate solution." And I love that line because that is how I feel about the response that needs to take place, is to create systems of accountability. And I think there are a lot of ways that people can do this, both whether you work in the public relations industry or not. If you are inside the PR or other promotional industries, advertising, branding, one campaign I've been following with attention is called Clean Creatives. It's a group of creative practitioners who themselves are coming together, actually very similar to the project that Clea mentioned with regard to the tech industry, but this is within PR. So Clean Creatives is about employees of these industries coming together and trying to hold their employers to account, to say, why are you still representing this fossil fuel company or this polluting company? We don't want to work for an organization that works with clients such as those, et cetera. So that's one form of accountability. In the US, of course, we have a growing number of lawsuits and legal claims against companies for their climate damages, failure to warn, and other things. And so joining on to those campaigns, learning about them, and at smaller levels, not just at the level of major legal claims, but just smaller levels of Federal Trade Commission frameworks for identifying misleading advertising, greenwashing frameworks, assessment frameworks that can be used. There are some databases online, and I can certainly recommend some in particular. These are all ways, I think, of just demonstrating the role that companies can play in when they are doing misleading or outright disinformation style campaigns, and making sure that they're not doing it. Of course, further down the line, my goal would be to have some regulation of the public relations industry. That's a longer conversation, but I do think it can be done. It's important to recall that these are totally unregulated industries in the promotional sector. And that is one reason we see the kinds of problems that we see today.
Thanks, Melissa. Jotam, could we come to you and ask you for some of your thoughts about how we turn this kind of promotional work to good, given that you've been working for some years now to try and push things forward? You're muted at the moment.
Thank you. In terms of addressing the information gap between our local communities and, in fact, the local government, even up to the national government and the developing partners, our strategy mainly has been to make the people aware about their rights by way of engaging with reputable organizations within the communities and within the province, most of them being civil society organizations and church organizations. Our biggest partner here is the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Papua New Guinea, which has been established and existing in the province for over 100 years. And they have a very strong community support and relationship that we tap into that network. And then we can communicate with the people. And once we can deliver to them the honest, the truth, and the fair information to the people, information is power. It empowers them to stand up for their rights. And that's how the people are being aware of their basic rights. The affected communities, especially the women and the youth, can utilize their free prior informed consents to equally participate in decision-making processes in order to avoid or mitigate the adverse impacts of such unsustainable development practices on our marine environment, and in fact on their health and well-being, including for their future generations as well. Mostly because we sustain our household economy from the Huon Gulf marine ecosystem, and are also culturally connected with the ocean. And therefore, these educational trainings that we run into the communities not only empowers us to protect our ocean and consequently promote a self-reliance, but also conserves our environment and preserves our culture and identity. Pacific Islanders find our identity in the ocean. And that is what we have to promote strongly in terms of sustainable development, and not just for us, but for the future generations. This enhances social accountability to an extent to multinational corporations and to the government and to us and for all of us to work together, and gives confidence to other genuine development partners. We're not saying no to development, we're saying do it the right way, so that the genuine ones can support free as well as fair collaboration with an informed and empowered community. And that strengthens democracy overall in Papua New Guinea. We believe that a better understanding of free prior informed consent empowers the communities to seek justice if in the event of injustice, so that we can participate meaningfully in consultation processes, also in public policy and legislative reforms as far as regulation is concerned in this country as well as in the Pacific region, and promote good governance in the future. We stand for one simple thing, and I end it here. Our stand is very simple. A clean, safe, and inclusive Huon Gulf marine ecosystem means a clean, safe, and inclusive Pacific region, and means a clean, safe, and inclusive world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jotam. And your comments also kind of echo Paulina's work and then also Melissa as well, in that they reinforce that this is deeply, deeply political. And it's about, most fundamentally about power as much as anything else. Thank you. I don't know if any of the other panelists wanted to come back on that more general question. We've got a couple more that have come in the chat, but I just wanted to double check that no one else wants to come in on that at this point. Okay. There is a question from a participant who is interested in that balance between, in terms of the impact on the distortion of the climate crisis, the balance between the need for better regulation and the greenwashing by public relations and promotional industries more broadly. What is at most fault in terms of the amplification of disinformation, and what should the role of government be, perhaps, in changing the ways that companies are regulated? I don't know who would like to start in answering that.
I can start just to say I'm from Canada, so I'm pretty aware of the Canadian situation, and I recognize that in Canada we have a very big problem, which is that we are very dependent on staples. We are very dependent on the tar sands. We are dependent on fishing, timber, paper, and so on. And so it is very hard for the government to see themselves as regulators of these industries. And I know there are other countries that perhaps find themselves in this situation. And so there is a lot of discussion of climate friendliness. And I think many of us think of Canada as a very climate friendly place, but there's very little regulation on the part of the government of those industries, and of also the public relations that they have been engaging in for so many decades. Right now, we are starting to see more and more pushback. Actually, some of it is coming from Greenpeace and other types of organizations that are trying to hold some of the oil companies, tar sands companies, to account, and their coalitions. So we are seeing a kind of boomerang process where international actors are getting upset with Canada, and that is forcing a response that seems to have some effectiveness. That seems almost like a kind of passing the buck strategy, that you are relying on the international groups to kind of hold Canadian government to account. But if it's effective, I suppose there's something there.
Can I maybe jump in? I'm just taking up this reflection because I saw another question that is related in a way. So on the role of tech organization and tech union organizations, we've seen, of course, recently, and I'm trying also to respond to one of the questions. And we saw recently many more unionists getting organized, representing big tech companies from Samsung to, you know, warehouse of Amazon, we actually saw a great movement emerging. And in my view, especially for what concerns, for example, the great silence, you know, to use the word of Melissa, on the environmental impact of big tech giants, I would say that one of the most interesting and most significant form of resistance is really coming from the tech union getting organized, because we saw them, for example, achieving something that was incredible at the time of their strikes for climate as well. So I think that actually that is a very promising global movement that I can see, while unfortunately at the level of global governance, I don't see the same kind of promise. I mean, from the US to the UK to Europe, although I have to say Europe has reached much more also in terms of antitrust, or actually, if we consider the right of repair, just to get back to another question that I saw in the chat about trying to push big tech giants towards making, for example, phones and devices easy to be repaired, and actually for the first time introducing the opportunity, as Apple is being forced to do, to give components and to be able to replace components. So there are, you know, a few forces that are emerging at the global level, but at the same time I see that precisely because of a mix of pressures coming from the extreme power, you know, of these big tech monopolies that are monopolies of the West and also of the East. You know, I think that, you know, what we should really acknowledge is that we have this problem of extreme power. So when, you know, you have big conglomerates that achieve such a level of ideological, economic, and political power, then of course also their PR like strength is much bigger, of course. And we also saw the intensification that is extraordinary of their army of PR, for example, working and lobbying at every level of government, from Brussels to Washington, and see, you know, these tech giants, PR agents really, and lobbyists really proliferating. Like the numbers are astonishing of Amazon investing on lobbyists, for example, or Google and Facebook. So they are investing on lobbying much more than they ever did in the past. And actually the tech giants are the #1, you know, in lobbyist expenditure. If you look at the public company financial documents, for example. So like, I think these are overall trends that we are seeing, and perhaps the tech union movement is one of the most interesting and most global that I've seen. So thank you.
Thanks, Benedetta. There was a question about whether it's possible to find out a bit more information about them. If you have a link to a site where people could find out a bit more about that movement, that would be really great. You could pop that in the chat. I'm very conscious of the fact that we only have 3 minutes left, and there are a number of really fascinating points in the chat, but I want to, rather than open up a new question, I think let's go back to Clea for perhaps a penultimate or a final comment.
Yeah, I wanted to roll together a couple of questions in the chat. Somebody had asked the very pragmatic question: what do you do when you stand up for stuff like this and then your client leaves, you know, so you lose your clients? And so what I wanted to do to respond to everybody was asking some of these questions about how PR could speak up, how do you act, etc. Melissa provided just one of those solutions, which is collective action through clean creatives. So what I wanted to start by saying is that there's a very idealistic way of teaching and training people how to do public relations. And I was taught that way when I started in the industry a very long time ago. I was taught by my bosses and every textbook that they handed to me that it was my job to speak truth to power. And as I learned in a career that lasted more than 20 years, that rule does not work the same for all of us. So if you live in a white majority country, as I do, and you are a white man with maybe a middle class or elite background, when you speak truth to power, whether that's the company directors, the clients, or any other important stakeholder group, they're much more likely to give you credence because of who is speaking. It's very different for women working in public relations, especially if they don't come from elite backgrounds. And of course, it's even harder for us, for those of us who represent minoritized groups. So I learned the hard way over the years that what I might be saying was true, but because I am a Black woman, it was not accepted and could actually get me in trouble, not just with the client, but with my bosses in an agency. How dare I speak out something that is truth? So I think it's very important for people who are working in the sector to acknowledge these realities and then decide how they can overcome it. And part of the answer to that is to do it collectively, especially for women, especially for people from minoritized groups. But if you work in public relations, there aren't really trade unions. And I have to say, professional associations don't even represent the majority of people who work in the field. So these don't tend to be the logical places. And this is why I am very happy to say that some of the best of these movements are coming from the middle of the sector, from maybe the younger millennials and some of the Gen Z who are just entering the industry, who care very passionately about these issues and are looking at the seniors at the top and they're saying, why aren't you doing anything? Well, if you feel that way, it's very likely that other people feel the same way too. And the beauty of the way that we communicate with each other on social media now is that it is easier to find people like you, but also you don't have to limit yourself to finding collective groups of people who happen to be based either in your city or in your country. So finding these sorts of international networks to come together to plan how you might do things more collectively. But then beyond that, how do you actually convince people in power? And I think there is good research that all of us can use. I was particularly struck going back through some of the writing this week. Work by people like Kate Crawford, whose book Cloud Atlas, I think, is a great read. If I were still running a PR team, it is a kind of book I would say to us as a team, let's have a little away afternoon and read it together, or, you know, read it beforehand and then come and discuss it together. And what Kate's research is particularly good at doing is taking an object and then breaking down that object and understanding the climate's impact. So she did that some years ago with the Amazon Echo. And I feel that if you're working in-house and your company actually makes something or offers a service, that's something that you could do as a PR team that maybe people in other teams would want to join in and do. Do you really understand the climate impact of the thing that your company makes or the service that your organization offers? And equally for people working in agencies, is that something that they could even help maybe people on the client side to do? Because, you know, the people on the client side are not always the chief executive or the head of marketing. There might be people who feel the same way that you do. So I just want to say, I am never idealistic about providing advice to people on what they could do next. I have a long list of things that I think can work, that worked well for me when I was a practitioner, but it was a hard road to hoe. So you need people around you. You need allies, and it's hard work, which is why collective strength is really the way to not run out of energy and not give up hope.
Thank you very much, Clea. And that sounds like a very hopeful and note to end the session on. I just wanted to thank all of the panelists with huge enthusiasm for what you presented today. It's been really enlightening, and hopefully we can follow this up with more events along the same theme. So to Paulina in Mexico, Jotam in Papua New Guinea, Benny in Australia, Melissa in the US, and Clea here in London. Thank you all very much. Thanks to all the panelists, the participants for joining us today. Once again, apologies for that glitch at the beginning, but we're delighted you could stay to the end, and we look forward to seeing you for a next event soon. There will be a recording of the event, and we will email around the link once it's uploaded. So thanks again, and have a lovely weekend, everyone.